Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-founder of Lightbox Expo, an event that connects fans with the artists and creators behind their favorite films, animation, games, TV shows, and illustrations. It's Jim Demonakos. Thanks for coming on, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
So it has been about 4 years since you've been on the podcast, when you came on to talk about conventions before. And we're going to be talking about Lightbox Expo. We're going to be talking about the broader state of conventions. But before we get into all that, I'm going to request something out of you. For listeners that don't know, I could do a quick spiel about what you've done in the past, but I wanted to have you do just a quick background on what you've done. Because, I'll do a quick spiel. You've owned comic shops. You founded Emerald City Comic Con.
Yep.
You worked for ReedPop.
Right.
What am I missing? Is that the gist?
In terms of conventions, sure. Just in the comics world, I wrote a graphic novel that was illustrated by Nate Powell. I was very lucky that was right before he did March.
Right.
So. I used to work for Image Comics. I worked for them for a couple of years, and I've just been kind of all over the industry to kind of every aspect. I used to have a nerd rock band called Kirby Crackle.
Yeah.
We used to tour around. And so, I love comics. I love the industry, and I've been in it in some fashion now for over 20 years.
You know, it's funny because you're totally just you're like a man about comics. I walked around Emerald City with you once, and I remember we stopped by the Skybound table and we stopped to talk to Sean Kirkham, and I introduced you to, and then I quickly realized that was a very stupid thing to do because Sean has been in comics for a long time and you've been in comics for a long time, and introducing the two of you is probably your 1,000th introduction or time talking.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially at Emerald City, having been there from the get-go, from 2003, by the time you roll into the mid-teens here, it's there's not a lot of people I don't know at every single company, at every single booth, at every single table.
Right.
And that's a good thing because what you want out of someone who puts on a show is someone who's also engaged in the community. When you have sort of people who are there that see the community as an opportunity, you can sense that in a convention. And I think that's one of the things that always set Emerald City apart was, from the top and then everybody I worked with, it was people who love comics and people who are engaged in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and now you've moved on to, I mentioned in the intro, Lightbox Expo, which is, like I said, an event that connects fans with artists and creators behind their favorite films, animation, games, TV shows, and illustrations. And I thought that was such an interesting thing because I don't know if that existed before. I don't know if not Lightbox Expo, but that type of event. Because I remember looking at it and I was just this is awesome. But I guess I never realized that somebody that worked in that type of capacity would go to an artist alley or something like that. But that started in 2019. The first one was in 2019. Yep. I'm curious, what is the origin of Lightbox Expo, and why did you want to do something like it?
So one of the things I've been thinking of, in 2015, I exited Emerald City and Reed took it over. And then I worked for ReedPop for a couple of years, working on a number of their shows. And one of the shows that actually I had my best time at in terms of interacting with the fans was actually Star Wars Celebration.
Mm.
And I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm not going to say I'm not, but I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. That's not my biggest fandom or whatever, right? The thing is that going to Celebration was interesting because everybody was there for the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? You were all there for Star Wars. Now, were you there because you got in on the new trilogy? Were you there because you liked the
Clone Wars or Rebels?
Original, yeah. Or are you there for Clone Wars? Are you there for, you name it? the thing is that everybody had a touchstone. Like you could just talk to anybody and you knew that you could have a conversation about Star Wars.
Right.
And that's not the case when it comes to most other events, right? You go to New York Comic Con, you go to Emerald City, someone could be there for celebs, someone could be there for gaming, someone could be there for, obviously for comics, someone could be there for, you name it. Like I'm just here for programming. I'm here for cosplay. I'm here for anime. I'm here for you name it. And so though everyone is there because they're expressing their fandom, you don't have this like immediate connection because you can talk to someone and be like, oh yeah, like I'm here to meet John Romita Jr. And it's like, oh, who's that? And I'm like, oh,
Right.
okay, so you're not a comics person. That doesn't make you obviously lesser or anything. You're just there for something else. While you go to Celebration, it's like, oh, you're here for Star Wars. And though that's so broad, that's still a commonality. And I thought that it was so cool that you could go to an event where everyone was there for kind of the same thing. I didn't go, but I had a friend who went to LeakyCon. This was a couple of years ago, and that's like a Harry Potter convention. And they had the same experience, which is like, listen, whether you're there because your entry point was the movies or it was the books, regardless, like you were there because you loved Harry Potter, right?
Right.
So anyway, I say all of that because after I left ReedPop, I was like, what am I going to do next? And that was a big thing for me. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. All I knew is I didn't want to do conventions. So spoiler, that did not really work out. But I did the spinner rack and I was like, that was like a fun thing to do. Also like trying to make something, like actually manufactured. That was like, oh, that was a totally different thing. But the whole time, my heart is essentially in conventions. Like I just kind of have come to realize that. And I was having this conversation with Bobby Chu. So Bobby is my partner and co-founder of Lightbox Expo. Bobby, he is a character and creature designer. He's best known for working on the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland films. He was one of the main creature and character designers for those two films. He also co-created Nico and the Sword of Light, which is a cartoon on Amazon, which has won an Emmy. And we got to talking about, he runs a thing called Schoolism, which is an online school. Well, it was actually one of the first online schools to teach digital art. So it's been around for over a decade now. And he's very focused on education. I'm really into art in terms of, like the Artist Alley was always my favorite part of the show, right? Like it's any convention, like Artist Alley is where you'll find me. So we kind of like combined this idea where I'm like, well, there's not really a great animation convention. Like, that's such a big world. Like, why don't we try to focus on that? And he's like, I'd love to try to do something where like everything is educational. And we sort of like, like smushed the ideas together and came up with Lightbox Expo, which was, the thing is you don't necessarily focus on the people who create especially when it comes to bigger media. Like at a Comic-Con, it's pretty easy to be able to like go and meet the creator of a comic book because they're right there. But you look at a movie like The Avengers, or you look at The Mandalorian, going back to Star Wars, it's like, well, this is really cool, but like there's a lot of people that go into it. Like who designed Baby Yoda? Who designed the child? It's like, well, that person has a name, and his name is Christian Alsman. And you could come to Lightbox and have a conversation with him, and that's not something that you would do at any other show. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we were like, well, why can't we learn from the people who are actually doing it? So our mandate for the programming is that if you're not teaching something, we're not interested in it. And that went from both everybody who was there in terms of artists and exhibitors, but also to the sponsors. So Pixar was like, we'd like to do a panel. And we're like, great. We don't want just, here's a trailer of Onward and let's talk about it. we're like, we need to learn something. So they came up with an entire presentation of how they reimagined Bo Peep for Toy Story 4 from both a character point of view and also a design point of view, so that it could fit with the aesthetic, but then that the character was still the same. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there for an hour with people from Pixar who are telling you how they took a character that's been in 3 of their movies and reimagined it for something else. And you can walk away because they would show, like, here's how we thought about her design. Here's how we thought about her clothing. Here's how we thought about, and you could take that to whatever you're creating and saying, oh, you know what? I do want to pivot. I do want to do this. Oh, okay. Well, that's how Pixar pivoted. That can give me an insight, maybe how I could do it.
That's awesome.
So that was sort of how Lightbox came around. It's this combination, like, it's an amazing artist alley because it's also curated, had like 1,300 applications for 250 tables. Everybody who's there is a working professional doing something in the industry. And then all the programming is also stuff from people in the industry teaching and trying to get people on board. So the attendees is a variety of people, but once again, in a weird way, almost the thing that everyone has in common is if they don't love art, they are there because they create art and also love art. So there's like this, again, sort of everybody you talk to, 90% of them had a sketchbook with them,
right?
Not to get sketches, they're like there so that they could draw and learn, and, aspiring professionals or fans. And it was a really great environment. Like, being inside of there gave me that like electric sense of like community that is really what I wanted to build.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, because, when you were first talking about Celebration, and I was actually thinking of LeakyCon too, there's like a surprising amount of those different events that are really focused on like one thing, like Con of Thrones. But there's all these different events, and I was like, what is the overlapping element that defines Lightbox Expo? And it seems to me that it's just basically like a passion for art. It's not as specific as like, I love Harry Potter, but it actually is in a broader way, which sounds like contradictory, but it sounds to be totally true.
Yeah, no, I mean, we didn't focus on a single thing because we weren't looking to be so narrow. And I don't say narrow in a negative way, right? Like, in a way, even though it's a giant show, like Star Wars Celebration is a narrow focused event because it essentially has one focus, right? That's okay. But what we're looking at is that if everybody who comes through this door is excited about art, is interested in learning, even if they're not learning necessarily so that they can become a professional themselves. Like, I am not an artist. I don't draw, but I am fascinated by the entire process and I love watching it happen. So I'll watch some of these panels just because I think it's interesting, not because I'm picking up a pencil and saying, great, I want to break into the animation industry.
Right.
And that's okay because, again, some of it is very inside baseball, and that's a good thing because, like, the most popular panel we ran in 2019 was hosted by DreamWorks, and it was literally what we look for in a portfolio. And it was packed. Because people are just like, you get all this stuff online about how to draw, how to, like, you want to draw hands. There's a million different references of like, here's a good way to draw hands. Here's how to animate. Here's how to whatever. And yet there's this gap between learning how to do the thing and then getting a job doing the thing.
Right.
And so we also wanted to put these panels that were this bridge, which was, okay, you've done the thing. Now the job paid for that. Let's talk about it. And those ended up being like standing room only, and we had to turn a lot of people away. Luckily, we also recorded them so that we could put them online for free. But yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, and the thing for me, like, I'm not an artist either, but I find, like, when I finish watching movies, quite often I'll like immediately go into IMDb and read the trivia page. And like, I'll learn about the details about how things were made. And I find all that, I watch special features on all like the digital Blu-ray stuff I have. And like, I do think it's interesting because you could have like somebody from, let's say, like Pixar, and you could have somebody from like Leica Studios, and you could have somebody from I don't know where else, like, you know, any number of places. And maybe somebody is like a huge fan of Leica and they're not a big Pixar fan, but that doesn't mean they couldn't learn something from each of them. There's like different values that they could take from each of them. And like maybe DreamWorks isn't something, I mean, I love DreamWorks. They do How to Train Your, or did How to Train Your Dragon. But that type of thing, that type of precise knowledge, I mean, that's the type of thing, like the, how do you, you know, the portfolio stuff. I've talked to people who go to art school and they're like, I never really learned I learned how to draw, but I don't learn how to actually get a job or what to do with it afterwards. And so like that type of activation is super valuable.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly correct. You know, we saw that there's this big gap between, again, like learning how to do it and then getting a job doing it. And so this shouldn't be hidden knowledge. And that's one of the reasons that, like, when we recorded all the stuff that we did, we're just putting it out for free on YouTube. Like, we're not charging or anything. We just want to be value. So even if you didn't go to the show, you're still getting a lot of the value that was part of the event, which is, okay, I couldn't make it into this panel. I couldn't even go to this show. Now this panel is online. So every Tuesday on the Lightbox Expo YouTube channel, we post a new video. Yeah. And there's such a great variety of stuff on there, and it's all learning. Like, there's not a single panel where you're just like, well, I mean, I guess you could, like, that I didn't really walk away from it learning something, because that, again, it was our whole impetus. So it's been a lot of fun trying to curate that as well, like curate the programming, curate the show floor, and make it a really high-end experience without a high-end price tag. You know?
Right. Well, and you were talking, one thing I'm curious about is, like, you were talking about how a lot of these people are the types of people that the average fan doesn't necessarily know. Like, you could watch How to Train Your Dragon and not necessarily know that Nico Marlet is like a god and like the reason why that these dragons look so rad. But, you know, that does make me wonder, like, what the Artist Alley experience was like, because given the fact that some of these people might, I guess maybe if the people are showing up with sketchbooks for their own drawings, maybe they are very aware of these people. But what was that experience like? I mean, was it pretty similar to just a normal con, or were there special call outs or anything like that?
Well, I would say that the difference was that there wasn't as much of what you would consider like the commissions / the drawing and even the originals. You know, like, there's a much different, like, you know, like someone like Nico, I mean, he's working at DreamWorks. All the stuff that he's drawn is not like his. It's owned by DreamWorks. And so he's also not doing, you know, sketches of the characters unless it's usually part of a charity thing.
Right.
So what the experience tended to be was a lot of people with art books. And most of the people were selling more art books than they were prints. So some people are like, all right, so, you know, David Harper works for Pixar and he worked on Up, but like, it's not like you have an Up print. You have all your personal art that you've been doing on the side. And that's what you have prints of. And that's what you have an art book of. And because people were there to learn and to, like, kind of absorb that kind of knowledge, the sales on art books were way higher than people buying prints, because it wasn't like, you know, a normal Comic-Con where you're like, cool, there's a great $20 Deadpool print. I'm going to put it up on my wall. People are like, you know, maybe you're a fan of the artist and you do want to buy a print, but a lot of people were there to say, hey, I want to learn. And so if I have a whole book of your drawings that I can look at over and over and over again, then that's going to be valuable. There's a lot of impromptu portfolio reviews, a lot of people going around and being like, hey, you know, like Tony Bancroft, who co-directed Mulan, you know, he's sitting there in Artist Alley, and you could be like, hey, could you look at my portfolio? Sure. Flip.
That's
and you
wild.
get some real feedback right there.
That's awesome.
So even though on one hand it was a traditional Artist Alley vibe, because you could just walk through, buy prints, people had enamel pins and plush toys, and it's all the stuff that they do outside of the thing that you know them for. Right. I would say for the most part. And that made it interesting too.
And the art book thing makes a lot of sense, because that walks that line between fandom and education, where it's like, you're a fan of this thing. This is a person who's behind something you loved. You're interested in this thing. This art book will help you get better at it in the same way that like this artist who did something you love is doing. It's like, I don't know. It's really interesting because when I looked at the Lightbox Expo lineup for 2019, I was just like, holy crap, this is like an unbelievable list of people, because I'm just like a big nerd. I'm not going to draw anything. But for somebody like that, now I can kind of see that through line and see just how powerful that could be. That's rad.
Right. And those people are, a lot of them, in having conversations with them before the event are like, so I've never actually, had a table at a convention. Like, so what am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And, what we end up doing with a number of people is, I don't know if you're familiar with Stuart Eng, of Stuart Eng Books. So he has a huge booth at San Diego Comic-Con. It's like one of the only shows that he does in such a major way. But he had 5 booths at Lightbox Expo because his main book, the thing that he sells most, is art books. So what happened was a lot of artists would actually just come to do signings at Stuart's table, who was selling their book. They didn't really sit around all day. They were there to do a panel. They would come do a signing, which would help, of course, the book sales. And but they would also have the same kind of interactions at the table. Like, yeah, I can take a look at your art real quick, or I can, like give you a tip, or, like, hey, if you follow me on Instagram, I do, weekly tutorials and this and that. So there's also a healthy amount of self-promotion, just like, again, there is in a regular artist alley, where it's like, yeah, like follow me on Instagram. I do this. Follow me on YouTube. Like I do free tutorials. Check out my Gumroad. I have paid tutorials that you can check out and download and own forever.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting because I was mentioning about how, like, this isn't a thing that really has existed in the past. I was curious if there was any sort of like, what do I do here? But
I mean, there was, like, there's definitely, especially after year one, there was a lot of people like, oh, okay. Especially because they saw what other people were doing. And there's veterans, like one of the people in the artist alley was like Dustin Wynn, who does a lot of conventions, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you go by his table and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I could do like a little mini prints. I could do this and that. And there's very few when it came to, like I said, like finding people doing commissions. But, a lot of people brought pre-prepared art. Like, you know what? I sketched in advance. Mm-hmm. So I don't sketch on site, but I've got a little book full of my sketches. Or, there's a couple of people doing paper craft. So they'd created a few different paper craft things in advance. And it's like, cool. Do you want like this scene of flamingos that I hand cut? Awesome. And I did. I bought it for my mom. So great.
That's awesome. Well, and I imagine like a lot of people who were at year one and were going to be at year two, it's like taking mental notes. And then when they're going to come for the second time, they're going to be set. Unfortunately, and now we have to get into the unfortunate part, something happened that prevented year two, the pandemic. And I was, we're going to talk about what you are doing now in the place of Lightbox Expo, but I am curious as to, like New York Comic Con just canceled like a week ago or 2 weeks ago or something?
Yeah,
officially.
A week ago.
Yeah. And it's like, I think a lot of this stuff is like people are, even I was kind of like, I'm surprised it took them that long, but a lot of it is like, they probably knew they were canceling for a long time. They were probably just figuring out what's next so they could announce that at the same time. So what was the process once like it became apparent that the pandemic was getting real, like going from like, okay, I'm aware of this to what are we going to do next? Like, was there a distinct process, or is it more running around with your hair on fire?
No, it was kind of the opposite. It was sort of like actually the stages of grief. We were like, okay, are we going to cancel this event? It's not looking good. Maybe we should hold out. Maybe things will get better. All right, things aren't getting better. Like, and these are all conversations. So we put tickets on sale March 9th. And like, it was like the week that the pandemic started to become more real. Right. And in our first 3 weeks, we're like, yeah, I don't know, like this pandemic thing, like, all right, are we going to be okay by by September, are we not going to be okay by September? I don't know. All right, well, like let's give it a couple more weeks. And that got us into like early April. So just sort of like to see how things were shaking out, because by early April, like already China had gone back to like not normal, let's say, but they were like, okay, we've got a handle on this. Everything is good. So we're like, all right, well, if we have a good response, maybe things will be okay. And like another week later, we started to be like, man, I don't know. I don't know. And within 2 more weeks, because we announced that we were canceling on April 29th. So just right at the end of the month. And we're like, we just don't believe that we're going to be able to run the show in September. And obviously that proved to be true. But at the time, it was kind of an early cancellation because so many other shows were still holding out by a lot. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're running a show in June," and I'm like, "No, you're not."
Yeah.
Like, I know you want to. We all want to, but we're not. We're not going to do that. So what happened is that we came up with our first plan, and our first plan was literally just like, we need to give everybody's money back. We're canceling the show. And then we're just going to figure it out. So we refunded all the attendees who had bought tickets. And then we're like, we're going to move the show online. All right, well, what does that look like? And the answer is like, we don't know. We don't know what that's going to look like. So we spent a month, we took basically the whole month of May to brainstorm and attend other online events because there's already ones happening. And so we would pop into events and check them out and see what the vibe was and see how they were structured and this and that. And then so at the beginning of June, we're like, okay, we have 4 months at that time. Beginning of June, 3 months. We're like, I think we have a really solid idea of what we want to do. And so then we started building it. And that's what we've been doing for the last 3 months, is building what we think is a more unique and interesting online experience for both the artists and exhibitors, but also for the people who are watching and experiencing the panels and programming for the event.
So, what exactly does that entail? Because I've seen a little bit of it. I don't want to steal your thunder, and I don't know the total, comprehensive, this is what you're doing part of it.
Yeah, no. So what we decided on, so the first thing, like, again, I think I mentioned that, what I super care about is the artist alley and how that's presented. And so many online events, it's like, well, here's a list of names. Check out their website.
Right.
Some of them have art. Some of them don't even. Some of them is literally just like a name. And it's like, this is just not what I want out of an experience. Like, what do I want out of an artist alley experience? And so what we came up with was like a Google Street View of an artist alley.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we created these structures. We're calling them gallery walls. And so each artist, because you don't need a table or chairs because you're not sitting in front of your virtual space, you have a whole wall. And you can do anything you want on this wall. This wall could be a gallery. It could display your art. It could pop up a video so that you could create a custom video or play a video. You could, there's links from the artwork to take you, if you are directing people out to your website to buy something, or you're saying, hey, I'm going to be live at this time, join me on YouTube or Twitch or whatever, and I'm going to live stream. And so this wall became sort of this, whatever you want it to be, whatever you want your interactive experience to be for the weekend of Lightbox Expo, this wall could help you accomplish it. And what we really, we're really excited for people to see it too. I mean, we have over 300 walls.
Wow.
Artists with a few exhibitors and sponsors. But even, the sponsors is like, Cartoon Network being like, hey, here's the programming we're doing this weekend. And also here's how to apply for a job at Cartoon Network.
Wow.
So, things like that where the experience of going through this virtual artist alley is going to be in one way similar to walking through, let's call it an empty artist alley in terms of there's no other people because, that's how it's created. But the discovery is what I'm really excited about, because the idea is that you're going to be able to walk through and you could go booth by booth. And if the person's art appeals to you, you're like, great, I'm going to stop. I can click through it. I can read about it. People are, they've linked to their ArtStation, Gumroad, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. If you want to go on social, here's some of my artwork. Here's what I'm doing exclusive for the weekend. Hey, I'm offering a discount for my online store for the weekend, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're going to be able to sort of walk up and down these aisles virtually and just spend as much time. It's open for the entire weekend so that, at 2 a.m., if you can't sleep, you can totally roll through Artist Alley. And I'm like super, super stoked for people to check it out, because I think it's so unique in terms of what any other online event has done to present an Artist Alley in a way that does justice to the amount of effort and time people put into creating the art that's going to be on display.
Yeah. I mean, even the version that you let me look at was, that was awesome, because you mentioned the discoverability. I think that's crucial, because when you walk the floor, it's like one of the things I love about Artist Alley isn't going to see artists I already know. I'm like, I already know the artist. Like that's cool. But it's like, if I want to check out, like, I don't know, Becky Cloonan's stuff, I can just go to Becky Cloonan's website, or I already am very aware of Becky Cloonan's stuff. But when you go to an Artist Alley, you're discovering so many new people, and so many artists that are exciting that you just didn't know about. Or like, even like, obviously you can't recreate this, but like when I was at Emerald City last year, there was somebody who had a print, and I was on the escalator like near them, and I was like, what is that print? Like, who did that? Unfortunately, they literally had no idea who they had just purchased that from. And they were like, it's somewhere over there. And I was like, okay, I eventually found the person. But anyways, but it's like, I love that discoverability element. And also the fact that it's like really intuitive. It's like, once you get into that environment, it's easy to move around. It's easy to like check out all the stuff. And I think that is like, it's cool that you can do whatever you want with it, whether you're trying to sell things, or if you're trying to like share a reel of like your work, or if you just want to show like your art or whatever. It's like, there's so many different options you can work with. I think that's rad. But are you doing, because like, one of the big ones that's happened, the virtual cons, is the Comic-Con at home. And that was pretty much entirely panels on YouTube. Are you doing some sort of paneling element as well?
Yeah, so we have over 200 panels that are running that weekend. But what we're doing is we're again trying to do something a little different than other events, and so part of it is what can you do? Again, this has been kind of our impetus from the get-go, which is like, what can you do online that you can't do in person? And so what we came up with was, why don't we allow people to do a interactive element with most of these panels? So for example, let's say you're doing a digital sculpting demo. The way we've structured it is that if you go to the Lightbox Expo website and you go to the schedule and you see the, digital sculpting with David Harper, there's actually like a download link. And you can download the same file that David is about to use on his panel to sculpt with. And you could sculpt along at home.
Wow.
You're not just watching someone do something. You could actually, at the same moment, take the instruction and do it yourself and learn.
That's amazing.
And we're doing that across the board with so many of the panels, like whether it's a layered PSD, whether it's, whether it's like the sculpt file for like ZBrush or something, whether it's on some where it's more like, let's say, how to break into the industry. The file is like a PDF. That's all the notes from, like, it's literally the PowerPoint presentation as a PDF, so that you don't have to take notes, you can just follow along and absorb it and then have everything for reference afterwards. Which again, in person, even that you can't get. So what we thought was, why don't we make a hub with our website? And the other thing we're doing is that we're not confining people to having to watch things to broadcast things on our channel. Like, the whole thing is, if we're trying to support the art community, I want to send people to see you on your channel. So I'm not going to make people do stuff on the Lightbox Expo YouTube channel. I'm going to have them do it on their own channel so that I can send the attendees there, so that then they're one click away from subscribing and you're gaining an audience. Like, I don't need that. I'm a facilitator. I want to make sure that you grow as an artist and you get a larger fan base and you get more people who are interacting with you. And so we're directing people outwards from Lightbox. But if you want the downloadable files, if you want all that other stuff, you have to go to lightboxexpo.com.
Yeah.
And it's not free. I just want to be clear. But also, the barrier to entry is $1. So the lowest tier is $1. The highest tier is $40. And each tier just gets you more stuff. But if you just want literally everything, it's $1. And so we feel like that's not so much a barrier to entry for most anybody. We're paying more in transaction fees than we are anything else, but we just wanted it to say, listen, what we're doing here has value. And so here's $1. It also helps keep out like the bots and spam and a lot of other stuff. So there's a lot of benefits for having a whole registration system as well. But we were also like, how do we make this as accessible as possible? And so it's $1.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually doing the dollar thing. It's funny. Do you know what The Athletic is?
I do not.
The Athletic is a subscription service that's all about, like, it's a subscription website / app that's all about sports. And it's like, basically what they're trying to do is recreate the sports pages for each part of the country, but with like the best writers doing exactly what they want to do. And it's a subscription based thing, but they discovered that even like just having a nominal fee basically weeded out all of the people who are horrible in comments. And like they have like remarkably nice and cordial like comments boards on all of their articles. And I do think that's kind of fascinating because it's like, the dollar, isn't that big of a deal. But at the same time, I'm guessing it's going to make your experience far better, or like the consumer experience far better, which is fascinating.
Yeah. And we're trying to do something where it feels good, so that that $1 helps run the event, and that's great. But and there's a couple other levels too. So like at the $10 level, you get a digital goodie bag. The digital goodie bag might not sound like a lot, but like when you list out what's in it, it's like, oh cool, DreamWorks put 2 full art books in here, and like there's stuff from Sony, Cartoon Network, Adobe is giving you free brushes. There's Procreate, Imagine FX gave an entire free magazine. There's hundreds of dollars worth of stuff in here, and you get that for $10. It's like, okay, cool. And so all that is stuff that, like, if you're at the $1 level, you're like, maybe you want, maybe you don't, but we're not making a wall between the $1 and $10 where the $10 people get to go to Artist Alley early, or get to, only they can download the files. It's like $1 gives you the exact same access as every other level. Just the other levels give you more stuff and merchandise. Like by $40, you're getting a tote bag and a print and, other stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's an incentive there. But we also still wanted to make it so that $1 gets you everything. Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, it's just incentivizing people with like goods, whether they're digital or physical. I mean, the $40 one, is that the one, I know you have some exclusives. Is the $40 one that comes with the Mignola tote bag?
Yeah, so Mike Mignola did an original illustration for us. And If you were at Lightbox last year, what we did is we did some like art walls, like these big 10-foot by 10-foot walls, and they were just art that people had done, and then we blew it up so that there would be like these great pieces of art just like around the show, so that it felt fun. And Mike had asked if he could do one for 2020, and we said yes. And then, of course, like you said, it's pandemic time. So we're like, well, what else could we do? And so we asked if he would be down with us doing it as, like the official tote bag for the event. He said yes. And so at the $40 level, you get a Mike Mignola tote bag along with other stuff. So, we just wanted to, again, make it fun, make it easy. And this $1 registration. On top of that, the one thing that I haven't even mentioned is that even at the dollar level, you get access to the artist database. So what the artist database is something that we built last year, and it's exclusive. Essentially, you can upload your portfolio and you can be very drilled down. Like if you're an artist, you can be very drilled down. You're like, you know what? I specialize in drawing vehicles for animation. And you could put that in there. And then all of the companies, all of our sponsors and all of our major studios have access to the artist database so that they can headhunt if they want throughout the weekend and before, of course. So if you're looking for work, it's a direct pipeline. And last year, there's 133 interviews that happened that led to dozens of jobs for people in the industry. And so it's just another cool thing that you get as part of being at Lightbox Expo is that you get access to create your own profile on the artist database and then have it looked at by all the companies.
The thing I really love about it is like when I look at a lot of these different events that are happening online, and I'm not condemning any of them by any means, but it loses some of like the structure that makes the whole thing feel together and also feel kind of like a con. And it's like what you're talking about really does use the word hub. It makes it feel like Lightbox Expo is the hub, but it's like all of the different elements are connecting to these people in a way that feels more like an actual convention. And I think that's really great. And also the fact that you're working in like the interactive elements, like those types of things are really, I don't know. I mean, I just think that's so cool that like you could be like the sculpting options. Like you could be following this person who's doing the digital sculpt and you're trying to do it at the same time. You're like, I don't know. It's like you're an active participant in the stream, but you're not showing your element. And I think that I don't know. It does, again, it goes back to your bridging of like the fan element with the education element. And it seems like you guys have come up with a good solution.
Thanks. Yeah, we're doing a lot. We'll also, and during the weekend, we're also having custom Discord channels where people will be able to talk to artists and their fellow aspiring professionals. And we also have like an activities page where like we've got challenges and fun stuff that you can download and draw and then like upload and hashtag. And Sony, is it Sony? Yeah, Sony is doing a new activity every day for that's tied in with their new movie, and like people can win prizes, and it's just all of it happens at lightboxexpo.com. So the funny thing to me is that we're making it so open that like, so let's say you're broadcasting on Twitch. Technically, someone can just come to Twitch and see your broadcast. They didn't have to come through lightboxexpo.com, but they're missing the interactive piece if they don't come through there.
Right.
And so, but we didn't want to restrict anybody either. We're not like, well, if it doesn't come through here, you're not going to see it. I just don't think that's cool. Like if you don't care about the interactive element, and you just want to watch this panel for an hour, great. Then that didn't cost you anything and you're having a good time. So, and that's 100% okay as well. Again, we're trying to keep the barrier to entry as low as possible, even if it's that $0. But for us, even for Lightbox, even if it's $1, that's it. Everything else is yours. And that's what we're excited about. So yeah, we've got a lot going on the website. And then we'll also have like, some merch and some other exclusive stuff. And I think just everyone will have a very fun time. At least that's the goal.
I do think it's interesting. It's like the obviously with the pandemic, there's like limited ability to actually shoot live action movies, and it's funny because like a lot of these people are probably still really busy. Like, the people who are working in animation and everything, like animation, I feel like we're going to get a crazy influx of animated movies in like the next year because it's like one of the only things you can kind of really have full going right now. And I don't know. I mean, I just think it's such a timely event. I think it's great. Well, I do. So to close, I wanted to actually talk a bit about like the state of conventions because, Lightbox is finding solutions. ReedPop just had their, oh my God, is it Metaverse? Metaverse. And then there's like the 2 DC fandoms coming up. There was Comic-Con at home. There's all these different solutions. But, I am interested in what your perspective is in terms of like the state of conventions. Like, do you think the pandemic provides very limited solutions, and who knows when we're going to be able to have actual big in-person ones? I mean, what's your read on it? Like, does it seem like 2021 is looking like an option? Have you had any conversations like that, or what's your read on all of it?
So I'll talk about specifically Lightbox. We are 50-50 that it's going to even happen September of 2021.
Right.
So, and that's a year away. I don't think conventions will be really back to normal until likely early 2022 or late 21. And even then, depending on how the pandemic, like it's all so up in the air, of course, but part of it is, all right, if there's a vaccine, great. Do you feel comfortable smushing together with 30,000 other people right after that?
Right.
Do you feel safe? Does everybody else feel safe? Does that mean people will show up for it? Do you need to create distancing guidelines inside of an event? I mean, think about any artist alley you've been to and then be like, okay, everybody has to keep 6 feet apart. Well, how many tables do you have to take out to accommodate that? How many? Like, how much do you restructure the event so that it doesn't even feel like the event like it used to be? And so there's a lot of it's super up in the air, and I'm so fascinated too because one of the things that Lightbox Expo Online is also a proof of concept, right? Where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to do this in person again next year, so this might be the experience. I hope you like it, and how do we make it better so that it is an experience you're actually looking forward to?
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope for the best, but I can't imagine that unless there's an honest to goodness, whether it's vaccine or something to that effect, that we're going to see conventions like they were for at least another year.
Yeah. Well, because if you think about it, it's like, it's not just like tables side to side, it's tables back to back too. Because, it's like, I don't think a banner is going to be enough separation when you're dealing with the coronavirus and everything like that. And there's two things about it. It's like, one, does a person feel safe? And two, it's like, how quickly, if you do everything you can to protect people, how quickly does your convention go from a fun thing to something that seems extremely dystopian? Pretty fast.
Right. I mean, I saw there was that concert in England. Did you see that? Where they had like these little platforms and there was 4 people per platform and each platform was 6 feet apart. And so everyone was at a concert. You had to know the other 3 people, like that. Those little platforms were basically for you and your people. Right. And it would keep you 6 feet away from all the other. And it wasn't like terrible. Like it wasn't what you would normally think of. But it's like, if you ever go to a concert and you're just sitting in your chair because you're so far away anyway, then was this any different really? Right. And it was an outdoor concert. So it was like, oh, okay. That's not bad. And I think that's what you're going to see is a lot of people trying to figure out what their what a socially distanced event looks like. But I mean, they just I just saw today that the NFL said that the first 3 games of the season will be without a crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, they're like the only ones that haven't just said, we get it, there's not going to be any crowds this year.
Right.
It's like, it's this inches. Everything's by inches. Okay, the first 3 games, and like by game 3, it's going to be like, now the next 3 games. No, just say that we're not going to have crowds this year, and do what the NBA has successfully done, do what the MLB has done, do what MLS has done, and say there's just not going to be crowds. We're going to televise it. You can watch it at home, but there's just no crowds.
Yeah.
The problem with conventions is that conventions are all about crowds.
Right.
And so if you have to say that, like, we have to cut our attendance by 2/3, is that going to be financially feasible, not only for the con organizer, but for the exhibitors to want to be there and to then, I think it would be amazing for the attendees, because you're like, man, I feel great. Like, there's no lines everywhere.
Yeah.
But how is that from an organizer point of view, where you're like, well, I was used to making $100,000 because 100,000 people were here, and now I'm making $25,000 because 25,000 people are here, or whatever, right?
Right.
So, like, at a certain point, those numbers don't add up for big events. And so what does that mean?
Right.
I don't know. Like, to me, it's sort of, I just think everything is going to go on pause for a little while. But I mean, everyone's going to keep announcing events. Then they're going to sell tickets. Then they're going to have to refund them. And then they're going to have to cancel the events. It's like, but they have to, because, I think it's like you're holding on to hope.
Right.
Even right now, I mean, I think Emerald City announced they're like, yeah, we're back in March. And I'm like, I love Emerald City. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I just.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a number of wrinkles too on the attendee side. I mean, frankly, it's like, I wouldn't go to a con. Like, post-vaccine, sure. But I mean, there's one wrinkle to that too, that it's like, just because there's a vaccine doesn't mean everyone's getting it instantaneously. It's going to be a prolonged process for everyone to get it. But I also think from an attendee standpoint, I'm going to date myself with this reference, but I feel like cons to a certain degree are like sort of the mall for some people. Like back in the day where you'd go to hang out with your friends and like, like, let's hang out and we're going to share this. And it's like, if you're, let's say your attendance was down to a quarter and like only, one of those 4 friends can go, that platform at the concert gets pretty lonely pretty quick. And it's like, do you even go at that point? And it is really interesting. I do think, like what you're doing and what all the other cons have been doing, it's kind of like comic shops. Like I've talked to a ton of comic shops about what's been going on during all of this. And I've asked a lot of them, like, are you going to continue onwards with some of the stuff that you've picked up during this? Because maybe it's effective, maybe delivery is effective, maybe more online sales is effective, maybe more mail order, etc. And most of them say, yeah, it's like a lot of their stuff they're going to carry forward. And I'm not saying that, like, let's say Lightbox Expo 2022, full out physical, you can do all this stuff. I'm not saying it's going to have as robust of an online component, but I feel like maybe some of the things you learned during these 2 years even could factor into the physical element later on. I don't know.
I totally agree. Like, I could see that the online event becomes a layer on top of the physical event, So if this virtual artist alley is a hit and people love it, and so next year we do the show in person, what's to stop us from also doing the virtual event on top of it for all those people who live overseas and who can't make it and who really want to come to the show, but they can afford the dollar, but they can't afford to fly to Pasadena and get a hotel room and pay $40 to get in.
Yeah, there's no downside to it.
It's funny you say the thing about the comic shops. My buddy Michael, he runs a shop here in Seattle and Woodinville. and he's closing his shop, and he is transferring everything into, he bought like a 14-foot bus, and he's basically turning into a mobile comics shop.
What?
Yeah.
I need to talk to this guy.
It's really awesome. Like I saw what he has been working on. And so he's closing his shop at the end of this month. He had already transitioned so many of his customers to delivery that he started thinking about, do I need a physical store that people don't want to come to right now anyway?
Yeah.
And so he's outfitting this bus with shelves and turning it into a shop that you can browse. It'll pop outside of your house. It'll deliver your books. But if you also want to check out what's new on the rack, you can walk into the back of the van, this long van, and check it out. And I was like, I flippin' love this idea on every level.
I do too.
Because he's like, not only would I do that for my customers, but then I can just go set up during, like, of course now is not the right time, but like just as you explain, it's like, I'm going to be at this park. I'm going to be during this festival. I'm just come on in and browse around. And there's just, I think a lot of the ideas that, like you said, a lot of the ideas that are popping up now are going to turn into something permanent more than we expect.
Yeah. Well, because, I mean, there's two factors to it. One, it's like he realized that without having to pay rent, he's going to probably make a lot more money, especially given how many of his customers transitioned over to delivery. So it's like now he's way cut down on his overhead, and he's going to have this more versatile platform. But then on top of that, it's like, I do think that it fits consumers better too in some ways. Like, I'm not saying like that's a perfect solution for every single person,
No.
But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I've long been a subscriber to the idea that there's more than one way to do anything. And a lot of stuff in comics or in fandom is often like you follow similar blueprints over and over and over. And I think that's great. I think it's great that that he's doing that. I think it's great that Lightbox is doing what you're doing, because I think that accessibility is super important. And like that, like if you had that artist alley, it's like if every person paid $1, you're not going to make a ton of money off of that. But your people who are, showing there in that, virtual room, I mean, think about the potential benefit for them. Like their reach expands dramatically because of that.
Right. And that's the other thing, is that if you think about, again, the very low barrier to entry, but also like, we have a huge fan base, and like a lot of these artists have a huge fan base outside of the US. And so for you to be able to say like all the stuff that you love is going to be at your fingertips, no matter where you live.
Even Alaska.
Yeah. Even if you live in Alaska, like it's just as accessible to you as it is to everybody else. And that makes it feel so much better.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, I am curious, like, there is that, I'm curious what you think, like, comics and fans, or not comics necessarily for Lightbox, but like what fans are missing without the physical event. Like, because I honestly could see like your friend who's doing the delivery thing. Like maybe that's a permanent thing. Maybe some cons realize that there's more value to doing a permanently online thing rather than having a physical thing. What do you think is missing when you lose that physical component?
I think human connection, right?
Yeah.
Like that's honestly the big thing that you miss. One of the things that we talked about a lot, and like there's not a good solution, of course, but it's sort of the idea that like you're also like you said, you're going there with your friends.
Right.
Well, I guess technically you could hop on Discord or Skype or Zoom or whatever with your buddies and walk around the show together and be like, oh, I'm in aisle 100. Look at this artist, like this and that. That can happen. But I think then even talking to, like when you get to meet the artist instead of just visiting their website, or, like even if they're doing a live stream, there's a few hundred people on that live stream. So even then you're not necessarily getting like a one-on-one experience. So at the end of the day, it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but that to me is something that still for line. Advocating for you can actually navigate our artist alley with a VR goggles,
Wow.
So, but I could see in the future this avatar style, and I mean avatar, not like blue skin, like movie.
You mean like you have an avatar?
Yeah. But like you and your friends are avatars, and thus you're able to interact and hang out with each other as you go to an event. Mm-hmm. So there's two levels of interactivity. There's the people you tend to go with, and even the other fans that you find even if you're there by yourself, and like if you have like a little bit of social, a little bit of being social, you can be like, hey, I noticed you're also in line for Becky Cloonan. Like, what's your favorite Becky Cloonan book?
Yeah.
And they're like, shut up and don't talk to me. And I'm like, great. Well, thanks for that. But
it's like celebration.
In front of you is like my favorite Becky Cloonan book. You know what I mean? So it's like you miss out on those things. And I totally get it. And then there's so again, that's the fandom side. And then there's the, talking to Becky Cloonan at her table for a few minutes. That's also missing. Yeah. So outside of that, not that there's not other things, because there's after hours, and there was a party, and then there was everyone went out to get tacos, and this is a super fun evening. All that is missing, but that's missing from all of us right now. So I don't have, again, that to me is the big part that's missing from an event, from an online event, is fan to fan and then fan to professional interactions.
Have you watched any of the NBA bubble?
A little bit.
Okay. Well, so they have like that fan wall, the virtual fan wall, where they use like Microsoft Teams, and they have the chairs and everything like that where people can sit in. Yeah. And, I do wonder if there's a way you could have that almost one-on-one experience where it's like the creator is sitting in their chair, and a person, they can have a line where it's you come up and you get 3 minutes. I know that Repop with Metaverse, they were doing those 2-minute meet and greets with varying celebrities or whatever, where you pay X amount. And, I do wonder if there's a way to do something like that. Obviously it's not ideal, but it is interesting. I like that. I hate the pandemic, but I like that it's making people think in outside the box ways. Totally.
I mean, again, we're outside of, like I said, the initial stages of grief. We really got into all right, well, what can we do to make this awesome? And
you're an acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now it's let's just make this as great as we can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it gets back to what you were talking about with Star Wars Celebration, where it's with the physical space, where it's being able to share that type of thing, the shared the shared universe of a convention is kind of that what's missing. But right. I think you guys are finding solutions. Well, Jim, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about Lightbox Expo, conventions, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Lightbox Expo's Jim Demonakos. You can find him on Twitter at Jim Demonakos and Lightbox Expo at lightboxexpo.com. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Hoffen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stefan Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slade, Sakil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Leona Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, at Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Benjamin Shipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.